Citizen Felon Suffrage Restoration, a Capstone 3 presentation in the Master's Program in Sociology at Arizona State University by A.M. Lockett. In 2016, 6.7 million American adults, or about 1 in 110 adults, were incarcerated in the jails and prisons of the United States, representing a more than fourfold increase since the 1970s. Today, America has the largest prison population of all countries, or about 1/4 of all the prisoners in the world. This presentation focuses on the approximately 6.1 million, or 1 in 40 adult Americans, 2.5% of the American population, who are current or previous felons and cannot vote as citizens of the United States. Recent studies show that the disparities in political representation in this country correlate to the disparities in felon disenfranchisement and are exacerbated by the social constructions of race and gender within America. According to the Sentencing Project, for approximately 6.1 million Americans who are citizen felons, or 1 in 40 adult Americans, there appears to be an historical correlation, if not causation, between citizen felon disenfranchisement and racial discrimination in voting in America. Further, the research reports that 1/4 of the states in the United States do not allow citizen felons who have completed their sentences and are no longer on probation or parole to vote. Today, the heritage of a nation founded on forced labor, imprisonment, incarceration, and disenfranchisement is geographically situated in the states that support the disenfranchisement of disproportionate populations of African American citizen felons, along with other American citizen felons of all races and ethnicities that are systematically being denied their right to vote as American citizens. The mass incarceration and disenfranchisement rates of American citizen felons, and in particular African American citizen felons, has risen so dramatically that the United States stands alone in the world as the most incarcerated population among all the nations on earth. Moreover, during the last 50 years, the incarceration of African American males has resulted in a life expectancy of 1 out of every 3 African American males becoming a felon in their lifetime, which is 7 times the expectancy of white American males. Similarly, 1 out of every 13 African American voters, regardless of gender, cannot vote due to being a felon. In the southern states, which have the largest African American populations in the country, the percentages of African American citizen felons who cannot vote is much higher than this national average. The relationship between citizenship and the vote has a long and arduous history in this land of democracy and freedom. Mass incarceration is not a modern phenomenon. It finds its heritage in the mass slavery of Africans for hundreds of years in America, who were literally imprisoned to the land on which they were forced to toil. The legal and political legacy of this mass slavery is depicted geographically in the states of the United States that enslaved African Americans and in the states that were open to the legal and de facto slavery of African Americans, Native Americans, Mexicans, and Asians during the development of this nation. According to the research, most of the state governments of the United States throughout the history of the nation have perpetuated the disenfranchisement and oppression of African Americans through the implementation of the Black Codes and Jim Crow laws after slavery was officially abolished, through the re-enslavement of African Americans using selective, racialized law enforcement and suppression of rights to supply convict leasing enterprises after the Civil War, through the transition from convict leasing to prison chain gangs, through the debt incarceration or peonage-based imprisonment, through racial ethnic profiling in law enforcement and conviction, and through modern-day peonage in the form of coercion-based plea bargaining. It wasn't until the mid-1960s that African American descendants of slaves finally had their right to vote fully supported in federal legislation. In 1965, the Voting Rights Act gave African Americans federal protection of their right to vote under the law. However, since the 1970s, when mass incarceration began its rise, African Americans have been systematically disenfranchised from almost all segments of American society, from employment to education to housing to voting. From the time of the Civil Rights Bill of 1965 to present, the incarceration and correctional supervision rates of African Americans has grown to a level higher than the number of African slaves in America before the Civil War. Given the history of African American and other citizen felons' disenfranchisement after release from prison, the unprecedented levels of incarceration of all Americans, coupled with the voter suppression of marginalized groups in America, puts the basic right of democracy, voting, at serious risk. Consequently, the federal government of the United States has enacted several statutes to address the rights of its citizens over the course of its history. Two monumental examples of citizens' rights legislation are the 14th and 15th Amendments to the Constitution of the United States. According to the 14th Amendment, Section 2 of the United States Constitution, the national citizenship of an American is defined as a person who is born in or naturalized and subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. Further, the rights of national citizenship cannot be curtailed or abridged by any federal or state government, but only the national government can legally modify the conditions of suffrage for its citizens. Unlike state citizenship, national citizenship is not conditional upon the residential status of the citizen and is a permanent state of nationality. Since national citizenship is a federal right of natural origin or naturalized process, the modification of the conditions of national citizenship, according to the U.S. Constitution, is legally under the sole auspices of the federal government. In addition, the 15th Amendment, Section 1 of the United States Constitution, addresses the diverse demographics of national citizenship in America. The statute guarantees that the, quote, right of citizens to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude, end quote. The right to vote is a right of national citizenship for the citizen felons of this nation who are in a previous condition of servitude, as well as the slaves of this nation who were in a previously held condition of servitude. The definition of condition of servitude is, historically and contemporarily, bondage and captivity for political, economic, criminal, or other reasons that requires a person to be under the control of someone else, having no freedom and at the complete command and will of another person or group of persons. Therefore, according to the definition of condition of servitude, once a person has completed serving a felony sentence, whether or not they are in a subsequent correctional supervisor status of probation or parole, that person also is in a previous condition of servitude that cannot be used by the United States government or any state government to deny or abridge the rights of the citizen felon suffrage. The impact of mass incarceration and citizen felon disenfranchisement is undermining the foundations of democracy in America. From the end of the Civil War to present, a majority of the states in the United States have inconsistently and varyingly promoted the disenfranchisement of racialized American citizens, including citizen felons, based on race, ethnicity, and conditions of previous servitude. States' rights issues, in deference to individual state constitutions and statutes, have subjugated the 14th and 15th Amendments of the National Constitution. Barring citizen felons from the electorate demonstrates a reversal of the most basic tenet of democracy, which is the universal right of citizens to vote for their elected officials. Several researchers have found evidence that the disenfranchisement of citizen felons informs a demonstrable negative impact on national elections at the congressional and presidential levels, including the popular vote and the electoral vote, especially in states where voter turnout is low and the election is possibly close. The Congress of the United States, to varying degrees, is aware of the plight of citizen felons. In 2015, two congressmen sponsored a bill to make it federal law to allow ex-felons to vote in federal elections. Moreover, some politicians realized that both political parties would benefit from laws that would re-enfranchise citizen felons in state and national elections. Even Governor Jeb Bush of Florida in 2000 appreciated the benefit of such actions when he restored the voting rights of citizen felon Charles Chuck Colson, a convicted felon in the Watergate burglaries and cover-up. The two members of the Congress of the United States of America who introduced the Democracy Restoration Act of 2015 were Representative John Conyers and Senator Ben Cardin. This act seeks to protect the suffrage rights of ex-citizen felons that are no longer incarcerated in a correctional facility, to require that state and federal governments inform and restore citizen felon voting rights upon release from a correctional facility, to support the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and the National Voter Registration Act of 2003, and also to freeze federal funding for the construction of any state prison facility if a state does not comply with the mandates of the statute. The right of national citizenship equals the right of the citizen felon, which equals the right to vote. Once a citizen felon has served a felony sentence, whether or not they are under the subsequent correctional supervisory status of probation or parole, that citizen felon remains in a state of previous condition of servitude for life, which cannot be used by the federal government or any state government to deny or abridge that citizen felon's right to vote. Within the context of the mass incarceration of African Americans and other people of color within the prison industrial complex system of America, and the unprecedented increase in the citizen felons represented by these traditional demographics, a new version of Jim Crow in America is exposed that extends the disenfranchisement and unequal democratic representation experienced by these racialized citizen felons to all citizen felons regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, economic status, age, religion, or sexual orientation. Therefore, the national rights of citizenship entitle citizen felons to the same right to vote possessed by all American citizens. And the right to vote for all American citizens of the United States is central to the continued viability of this nation as a democratic republic. Thus, this is a call to action for the national government of the United States to acknowledge that it has the sole power to define the privileges of American citizenship and its immunities, to enact national amendments to the United States Constitution to permanently establish the universal right to vote for all American citizens, including citizen felons, that cannot be modified or abridged by any state or local government, and to reintroduce and enact the Democracy Restoration Act of 2015 for the restoration and protection in perpetuity of full national citizenship and suffrage rights for American citizen felons. While the plight of incarcerated African Americans and other persons of color who are citizen felons is the impetus for these suggested actions, the focus of this presentation centers on the right to vote for all Americans in national level elections as the birthright or naturalized right of national citizenship, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, national origin, or physical condition, including persons whose previous condition of servitude was serving prison sentences, the American citizen felon.